coming from that.
Okay.
That needs to
3,
be.
2, 1.
Hello and welcome to MMS Sessions number 10. I'm joined here today by DJ and broadcaster David Dunne. For anyone that's looking into getting into radio or podcasting, this is certainly a session for you, so please do stay tuned. As usual, it's a fully interactive MMS Sessions. Please tweet us at MIDI School or please join in on Facebook. David, it's over to you.
Hello and welcome to this talk on podcasting radio shows. Hello to you if you're watching at home or wherever you are. Hello to the beautiful studio audience, as they would say on a TV show. What we're going to do tonight is I'm really going to talk about music podcasts and music radio shows because that's what I sort of know about. There's a world expert in this room on speech, podcasting and radio shows, and she can do that stuff for you. I'm just going to talk about music shows primarily. It's my favourite slide. It's all about me. I'm just going to tell you a bit about what I do and why they've asked me to do this. My name is David Dunne. I'm from Swinton in Manchester, which is a small town about 3 miles from here. If you drive through it, that's about all I can say about Swinton. It's on the way to somewhere else. I fell in love with radio as a kid. I was literally that little spod who used to be under the bedclothes with a headphone in so my mum and dad wouldn't know I was listening to the radio late at night. And particularly when commercial radio started, which for a lot of people here, and I guess a lot of people at home, you won't remember a time when there weren't stations like Key 103 or Capital or Galaxy or KISS. Back when I was a kid, there were like maybe 2 stations you could listen to in Manchester. There was BBC Radio Manchester, there was Radio 1, there was Radio 2 as well, but there really wasn't very much at all. And then this thing started in the mid-70s called commercial radio, where you had radio stations in your town, your city, with people on who sounded like you, talking about places you lived. We all take that for granted now. At the time, it was amazing. You just never heard that. You would never hear anybody with a Manchester accent on BBC Radio 1 unless they were in a news bulletin being arrested. I mean, you literally didn't hear regional accents. You might hear the town you come from mentioned once every 6 months if you were lucky. So to have a radio station in your city that had people on that sounded like you, talking about where you lived, was a revelation. And that's when I really got the radio bug. And I was that sad kid who used to have a tape recorder recording the chart show with a microphone, and as the presenter would speak, I'd turn him down and I'd do a link about it and then turn it back up, hoping the music had started to make my own radio shows. And I always wanted to work in radio but just didn't know how to get in. And I went away to university, to Liverpool, tried to get in there, couldn't, came back to Manchester with no job, ended up living back at my mum and dad's, which was brilliant, and fluked a job into Piccadilly Radio working on a charity appeal because I'd worked in the Students' Union and they needed somebody who'd done charity things. And the first day I started, a guy who's still at Key 103 as it is now, Piccadilly Radio, Paul Lockett, who's a journalist who got me in, said, you've just got to make sure that you do 150% of what you're asked to do. So do everything they ask you to do and do more if you can, and don't set fire to anything, and you should get a job. And he was right. And my first job was doing what they call clubs and concerts, which was when I met a guy called Simon Cole, who Emma knows about. And I literally had to wander around all the music places. If we were doing a gig, if a band came to town and we were doing a co-promotion, I'd go and stick up the banners, and I'd go and organise sort of tickets and used to give out the stickers. And all the time knew that what I wanted to do was be doing radio shows. And that's what I dedicated myself to doing, and just made myself indispensable, gave up my life for a year so that when I wasn't doing my day job, I'd go in at night, I'd answer the phones, I'd make cups of tea for presenters, I'd clean rooms for them, do the editing, learn how to edit. And I just made it my business to make sure that I could do something in this thing that I'd loved for years. So I started there in '87. Somehow I've managed to fluke my way through, and I've worked in radio more or less consistently all the way through. There's a few times when I've gone and worked like in music management and stuff like that, but I was still doing a radio show at the same time. So I've kind of always been involved in music radio, and it is what I love to do best. At the same time, around about 1988, when I was in Manchester, the Hacienda also changed my life. And I went from wanting to wear a suit and tie and run a radio station to trying to figure out how do you do that music and radio. And so I started doing specialist shows. I did a dance show on Piccadilly called the Isometric Dance Class, not my title. And that's how I started doing that. So I've kind of done that ever since as well. And then I've also done a bit of DJing. I've been quite lucky with that and had the two running side by side, which is quite a challenge if you're up till 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning and then you're in an office on Monday at 9 o'clock to do a day job. But we managed to do it. Currently, my job is I'm head of music and a music scheduler for a group called the Wireless Group now, UTV. We were called up until 3 weeks ago. They have 9 stations across the UK. It's very sort of broad pop music, commercial radio, and I schedule the music so that all the music you hear on stations like Capital Kiss, whatever, is all scheduled in advance by somebody like me, and the presenter then goes in and it's their job to sell that music. So that's my day job. I'm still sort of doing a bit of DJing, and I do my own radio show, which is called the Triple D Radio Show, which is a dance music thing, which I'll talk about a bit later on. So that's me, basically. I did think, though, when I was going to do this, that if I just gave you my opinion, it would be pretty one-sided and a bit tedious. So what I've done is gone away and asked some people a bunch of questions about podcasts and radio shows to find out how they do it. So these are the people we've spoken to. So there's Toby Whitehouse, he's the programme director of Gadio, which is a community station that operates in Manchester, and he's very successful. He was also trained at the BBC, so he has a background in really solid radio production. Andy Durant is a guy who runs a company called Distorted Productions, who make various radio shows for all kinds of people like Paul Van Dyke, Defected, Claptone. They do commercial podcasts as well for brands and products. He was also a club DJ for many years and a producer of his own tunes. Chris Buckley, who is the programme director of Signal 1 and 2, which is stations in my radio group. And they're very broad service, as I said, FM and AM, all these station services. A guy called Brian Cheetham, who produces a syndicated specialist dance show called the Global Dance Sessions, and who I've worked with several times over the years at places like Ministry of Sound and Galaxy and Capital. And Duncan Wallace at Apple Music. Now, Duncan's quite an interesting chap. I used to do the Hed Kandi radio show, which used to be on Galaxy as was. And Duncan was theoretically my producer, so I used to do the show and send it to him, and then he'd call me up because he was based in Leeds and I was in London, and he'd tell me how rubbish it was and how to make it better. So we did that for a while. Then we started doing the shows live, and I used to work with Duncan, and Duncan had gone into Galaxy as a T-boy, literally as a work experience, just helping out, and had worked his way through. Duncan now produces shows for Apple Music and specifically the Beats channels. So one of the guys that he's working with currently is Elton John. He does his sort of monthly podcast. He's done podcasts with Pharrell. He's done podcasts with some of the biggest names in music over the last year and a half. You know, if there's ever proof that if you get in and you're good, you can succeed, Duncan is living proof of it. So these are the people that I've asked to fill out what I'm going to talk to you about. Just, you know, it's not just me. There are people involved in this who know what I'm talking about. What do you need to make a great radio show? I'm going to start by saying I'm not going to get into things like how you do coding for social media or in-depth tech stuff about the, you know, how you get podcasts here, there, and everywhere. I'm going to talk about what goes into a show. So it's the content. Because, you know, you can get yourself a great logo design, you can have a great name, you can know how to use Facebook Edge, you can know how to use the algorithms of Google, but if your radio show that you're making is not any good, it's not going to make any difference. So what I'm going to talk about is how to make what happens when you turn on the deck, turn on the microphone, how you make that good. That's what I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about pirate radio, because of my day job. That would be a conflict, and I'm not allowed to promote pirate radio as I work for Legal FM Radio, and I'm duty bound to tell you that if you do work on a pirate station, you cannot concurrently work on a legal station. So if any of you are thinking about doing pirate, do bear in mind that you won't be able to go and you'd have to give up the pirate stuff to be able to work in Legal FM Radio, because they are really tight on that. I would say that pirate radio has produced some of the best music broadcasters the UK has ever seen. And it fulfills a remit, I think, that legal radio doesn't. But that's all I'm going to say on that subject. So you need passion about music. Sounds obvious, really, but It's the key ingredient for any successful music show. You need to love the music that you play. Now, it might be, for instance, I know there's a couple of people who have done pop shows, that you don't really love everything that you're playing and you're doing it because you want to work in a radio station, and that is part of commercial radio, certainly, in doing that. But if you're going to make your own specialist show, I would make sure that you love what you're going to play. If you're a club DJ and you're out there, you might not have everything in the show. You might not play stuff in your club set that you would play in the radio show, or vice versa. But if you love the stuff that you play in your show, it's going to stick together. Because no matter what genre you're doing, if you've got a love and a passion for that music, it will link everything together because it's you running through your choices of music. So you need to have that passion about it. It really helps if you can communicate that and communicate what the actual essence of the music through what you're programming and what you're saying. It's not as easy as it thinks. I mean, we were talking before, and I was talking to a guy here who actually does radio and podcasting now, who was saying, you think it's going to be dead easy, you just turn the mic on and you speak and it's that easy. And it's not. It's not that easy. But you can learn how to make yourself better at doing it. And there are many different ways of presenting shows. I come from a background of being quite tight, of not waffling on like I'm waffling on now, that your links are short, tight and snappy, and you have a through line that follows them. You can learn the tricks of how to do it. It's not easy though, not everybody can do it, which we have to say up front. Great selection and production abilities. So, it's about taste. And again, it's kind of hard to teach you that, but you've got to have a consistency to what you choose to put in your show. It doesn't mean that it's bad or good. Lemmy from Motorhead, I've used this quote 1,000 times, Lemmy from Motorhead said there are only two types of music. There's music you like and music you don't like. So bad or good music is irrelevant. You've just got to be able to choose what you think is right, and that goes back to the passion, again, about having the passion to think about what you're playing, love what you're playing, and put that together in a really good way. Dedication. If you're looking, for instance, to do a weekly radio show, so you're going to do it every week, you are going to have to do it every week. If you want to work on a community station or an FM station, for instance, and you say, I'm doing a weekly show, you're doing a weekly show. That's 52 shows a year. You may be able to get a week off here or there. Your program director, the boss, might say, nah, we need you to do a show every week. So if you're going to go on holiday, you need to record 2 before you go. If your show is going out at 8 o'clock on a Friday night, it's got to go out at 8 o'clock. You can't ring up and sort of say, can we start at 9? I've got something to do. So if you're going to go into this process and you want to do it properly, you've got to have a degree of dedication about doing that show properly. My show's 2 hours long. I would say in actual working hours on it, which includes going through all the music, putting it together, constructing the show, that takes me about 10 hours a week. And I would say any radio show, you should spend the equivalent of a full working day on it, at least, to make sure that you've got everything as good as you can possibly make it. So you are going to need dedication. If you're going to try and get onto an FM or a community station or even an online station, you are going to need persistence, because a lot of people will say no. It's not an easy business to get into, particularly if you're looking to go into sort of full service FM stations. It's a really hard nut to crack. So you're going to have to be prepared for people saying no, it's not quite what we're looking for. Or in some cases, even getting an answer is difficult. So you'll need persistence if you're going to have a go at it. That's something else, and this is the most unquantifiable and difficult thing to sort of get, really. What's going to make your show different? Why is your show better than what's on already? Why are you the best person to do a radio show? Again, it's something that you can't really teach, but you do need to have just something different, either in the way you present it, the way you put it together, the music. There's got to be something which makes it stand out from the thousands and thousands of radio shows and podcasts which are out there now. So let's say you've got a show. Where does it go? What are you going to do with it? And you'll notice I'm saying radio show. Let's forget the term podcast, because I like to think in terms of these things of radio shows. Podcast to me always sounds a little bit drier. It sounds like a speech thing. If you're going to do a music show, think about it. It's a radio show. You are communicating through it. So where does your radio show go? Well, bad news. There's more FM radio stations, for instance, than ever before in this country, and there are less opportunities. Commercial stations are mostly grouped into network. The one that I work for has 9 FM stations and 3 medium wave. You know, the likes of Global Radio, who run Heart, Capital, Smooth, LBC. They own I think it's 38% of the radio market in the UK. So there are these huge groups, which means that there's loads of networking. So, you know, if you're listening to Capital in Manchester, a radio show is coming from Manchester at breakfast and at drive time. And the rest of the time, it's coming from Leicester Square in London. So there's one show on in the mid-mornings and the afternoons, one show on at night, which means there are less spaces to put radio shows on those bigger networks. The good news is there are things like community radio, there's online radio, and we have used that word there, podcast. So if you want to do a radio show now, it's not kind of like it was when I was a nipper and you just had FM stations. You've got other options. So you can take your radio show and think, well, you know what? It's maybe not going to go on Radio 1 this week, but I'll go and do it for somebody else. I am a massive fan and advocate of community radio. I think community radio stations are doing what the commercial stations did 30, 40 years ago when they started. Just in case you don't know what a community station is, it's traditionally in this country it's an FM station. It has a very small broadcast area, what we call a TSA, a footprint. So for instance, Gadio is really Manchester city centre and a little bit out beyond. I live out near Wythenshawe, which is about 9 miles out of Manchester. I can't really get it there. I only start getting it as I get past Chorlton and come into Manchester. So its footprint outside the city centre is quite small. Something like Salford City Radio, which is round here, similar sort of pattern. They're meant to serve small areas or small interest groups. They exist almost universally on volunteers. So they're run by people who don't usually take a wage out of it, who don't get paid for doing the shows. They do it because they really want to do it and they really love to do it. And that's got to be a great reason to do it. They're quite restricted in how they can earn money to stay broadcasting. And also they can't have what we call radar, which is the listening figures, the surveys we do, they can't figure in that. So it's quite a tough sell for some of those stations. Quite a few of them have gone under in the last few years. But I think they are one of the best things to happen to UK radio for ages. And they really deserve people's support. Community radio stations are always looking for content. If you can do something that fits what they're doing and that they've got a space for and you will do it for them and do it with all your heart, you have a good chance of getting on there. Below that, you have online radio, and I'm not doing down online radio, but that's another option which you can go to. The gentleman we were talking to before is on in Chicago, which is the birth of house music, fantastic place to be on. The great thing about online stations is you can be anywhere in the world and you can put your show on them. They are almost all looking for content all the time. Some of them are quite big, to be quite huge by comparison to some FM stations. And there are very, very, very cool online stations, and there are some very, very, very strange online stations. A friend of mine has just started one in Stoke called Cheesy FM, and all they do is play Total Cheese 24/7. That's it. I can listen to about 15 minutes of it, I would reckon. So online radio is a good option if you can't get to a community station. I do think internet stations can be really creative. Very often they're quite tightly focused as well in terms of what they want to do. So they'll say, okay, we're just going to do this kind of dance music, we're just going to do this kind of specialist music, and that's it. That's all we're doing. So you need to pick and choose. And thankfully, the wonderful world of Google means if you want to do a minimal techno show, you can find out where those online stations are. They'll always have a contact on there. They'll always have an email address. So they're very easy to get hold of. I know, again, sorry to keep harking back to you, the gentleman back there did a guest mix on one and got offered a show. So you never know where those opportunities are going to come from, but at least you can find out where they are. And there is that word, which is podcasts. Let me just go through this. I'm wizard all over there. What's the benefit of actually doing your own podcast? Well, you don't need a radio station at all. You know, you don't have to go to anyone and try and get your show on. You can just make it and figure out a way to get out there. You don't need to sort of say, you know, to a program director, I'll have a show for you every week at 8 o'clock, guaranteed, 2 hours long. It'll be there all the time. You can make it every week. You could make it monthly. You could do a podcast a day if you were that insane. But it's entirely up to you how you do it. So you don't need a station. Numerous ways to go. You know, you can put it up on Mixcloud. You can put it up on SoundCloud if you fancy braving the copyright issues there, which are particularly difficult if you're playing current music. There are various platforms where you can stick a podcast now. You're not limited to just one or two. Social media will be your friend if you are doing a podcast. And I will come to that in a bit more detail later on. If you're going to do a podcast and you're going to put it up on Mixcloud or any of the other platforms, you are really going to have to work it, because there's no radio station to work it for you. There's no promo on an FM station saying my show's on at 9 o'clock. It's down to you. And so social media will really, really be your friend. And if you're friends with anybody who does a podcast or a radio show, you probably on the day of their podcast coming out, you will see numerous posts coming through about it, which unfortunately is one of the things you have to do now, because Facebook is so restrictive in how you get your posts seen by people. You really do have to work that. So if you're going to do a podcast, get to grips with social media would be my advice. Before we go on to how do you make it, I would say, although I might have seen disparaging about podcasts, they can be quite a transformative thing for people. One of the most listened to podcasts in the world is Gareth Emery's State of Trance show. And I don't think it's too rude to say that before he did his podcast, he was kind of well-known-ish in the trance world, but he wasn't a massive top 5 DJ. That podcast just went crazy. I mean, just crazy. And he will fully acknowledge that it changed his life. You know, his label got bigger. He got more and more gigs. He could do tours. His profile raised as a DJ. And, you know, that podcast was really transformative for him. So I know we have a few hyphenates. We've got some DJ producers in here. We've got some people who want to do radio production or stuff like that. Podcasts can make a difference to your life. And there are numerous people who've started doing little things on YouTube or on Facebook even, as blogs that have changed their life. And you can do that with a radio show. So how do you make the thing? First of all, observe the 6P rule, which was something I was told in my very first job. And the 6P rule is prior preparation prevents piss-poor performance. By that, we mean don't just wing it. Right? Now, I've worked in radio for 20-odd years. I've done daytime shows. I've done drive time, you know, I've done all that stuff. I would be lying if I said that I had not at some point turned up in a radio studio with 10 minutes to go with not a bloody clue of what was going to happen. Well, literally, with like my records in a bag and not knowing what I was going to do. And I can guarantee you those would have been the worst shows I ever did, without a doubt. Even if you're not doing a live show, putting preparation into what you're going to do, if it's a pre-recorded radio show or podcast, it's absolutely essential. You can't just wing it. Even the best can't wing it. So do put the work in. You can make your show in individual elements if you're doing a pre-record, which we'll show you some examples of later. Sounds obvious. You've got music links and idents or sonics, or what we used to call jingles. And you're going to put them together to create your final product. To do that, you're going to need some kit and tech, obviously. Sounds obvious, but you are going to need a really good microphone. My advice would be find the best one that you can afford. I've heard some great music podcasts that sounded fantastic, music brilliant, and then the presenter does a link and it sounds like they're inside a toilet with their head in the toilet and the microphone is in the kitchen. And it's like, it takes you straight out of it. As a listener, you get this awful, awful sound, and it's just like, oh, really? You know, you've spent all that music's great, the mix is great, and then you've just got this terrible, terrible sound, which is usually down to having a really bad microphone in the first place, because all the processing in the world in Pro Tools or Adobe Audition or whatever you're going to use, if you've got a really crap microphone, it's not going to make it sound any better. So get the best microphone you can. If you're going to run it through a separate sound card, do that. I am very lucky. I work in a radio station. For my show, I go downstairs and do the links through the desk. Before I was there, I managed to blag off another radio station a really good Neumann mic. I found a part of my house where I could stick it in a corner, made some baffle screens so I could get a good sound. I experimented with it to try and find where I could put the microphone in a room so it didn't sound like I was in the toilet. But I had a good microphone, which was half the battle. So I mean, my advice is, if you're going to talk on your podcast, get the best mic you can. Good production and music software, again, obvious, but you're all involved in this world, so I shouldn't even have to tell you this really, but I do it quite simple. I do my music in Ableton. You don't have to do Ableton. You could use Pro Tools or Logic or any of those things that you like to do. The reason I like Ableton is, A, if you're doing kind of mixes, it's great for that. B, it's really easy to edit. It's really easy to edit tracks down, which I'll come on to another reason why you want to do that later. But if you've got to do any editing of the music to make it fit, Ableton's a really simple program. I don't know how to use Logic. I have friends who tell me Logic is even simpler. But for me, I use Ableton to do that. And then, once I've got all my bits, I put it together in Adobe Audition. Adobe Audition is a favourite with old radio farts like me. It started off as a program called Cool Edit Pro years ago. You would be surprised the shows that have been put together on that fairly inexpensive and simple system, and continue to be. Some of the biggest dance shows you've heard, certainly in the UK, were just put together in Cool Edit Pro because it's simple. There's no need to make it too complicated. You know, you're essentially going to have 3 elements to put together. But find the one that works for you. If you're a whiz on Pro Tools and you know how to do it on there, do it on Pro Tools. If you use Logic and you want to do it on there, do it on there. If you want to use Audacity, God help you, but you can do it on there. I really would say don't use Audacity. It's far too difficult. You can, I know, do you still get a student discount on Adobe? Do you get a discount, yeah? If you can't afford to sort of pay for it all at once, I actually rent Adobe monthly. It costs me 20 quid a month to sort of get the rights to use it. And that's how I do it. So, you know, it's not cheap, but you can avoid paying 200, 300 quid all at one go. So get some good software to put it together. Idents and sonics. So this is the jingles. These are what can be and have been over the years some of the cheesiest bits of any radio show ever made. And also can be some of the best bits. Look on the idents and the sonics in your show as a way of selling you and what your show is about. Don't ever think that I can just, if I'm going to do a radio show, I'm not going to have anything going on for 20 minutes. Because what you're going to do is you're going to say you have 20 minutes of a mix going out and there's no idents, there's no links, there's no anything. A, it's a bit boring. And B, how are people going to know who to listen to? Who is this? What is this that I'm listening to? I don't know what it is. I might have found this by accident. It's all, nobody's telling me anything, and they'll probably retune and go somewhere else. And I know it's tempting to think you don't need to have them. But actually, it's a really good way, if you don't want to talk a lot, for instance, it's a really good way of saying who you are, what your show is, even what's coming up next. Maybe you've got a music feature, you can make an ident, a sonic, a jingle to do it. Those will do some of the work for you, and you know, it'll inject a bit of life into your radio show. And you can make them yourself. You know, especially you guys should really be able to make jingles really well. You know, I've struggled over the years. I can just about cobble together. But jingles and idents, placed correctly, can bridge 2 songs. So if you don't want to have speech after every song, bridge 2 songs with an ident or a jingle. It can be really useful if you're doing a cross-genre show. If you're hopping around, you're not just doing all house, all drum and bass or whatever, and you want to go from one thing into another, it's a different tempo or a different genre. If you stick an ident or a sonic on the end of one song, you can then come straight in off the back of that. So it can help you jump around as well. They really are a really useful little tool to help your radio show go with a bit of a bang and give it a bit of pizzazz, and to get you out of some fairly difficult situations if you're crossing music genres. Putting the show together and structuring your show, this is the most important bit, I think. You've got to think about what your show is doing. It's really tempting if you're a DJ to think of it in terms of a DJ mix. So, you know, if I was going to stick a DJ mix up on SoundCloud, I would want it to showcase what I did in a club. I want it to feel like a club set. With a radio show, you don't have to do that. And in fact, I would advise you not to. You can change. You can change pace, you can change tempo, you can change genre if you want to. You can put musical surprises in there, which from a listening point of view makes it much more interesting. You know, if you just go from point A to point Z and you just do that, it can be, unless it is a dedicated mix show and that's why you listen to it, if it's a radio show and you're in it, it can be pretty dull. It's much more interesting if you have something that does that, goes up and down. From a listener's point of view, there's more life, there's more interest, there's more surprises. So think about where you're going to put stuff in your show, musically, what you're going to do. Always, always start your show with a song that's got some impact. Don't ever start a show with something that's just noodle, because that's the start of your show. That's the listener's introduction to what you're doing. So try and start with something that's got a bit of oomph about it if you can. It's got something distinctive. And also, if you're using like a club track, don't just start with the beats. Start where there's something happening in the tune at the very least. You know, so if you've got 45 seconds of beats so that you can mix in and out of it as a DJ, get past those and go to when there's some life in the track. Because again, you are starting your show. You want to come in with something that's got a little bit of impact. So think about where you put the music and how you're going to do it. Don't be frightened to go up and down. Don't be frightened to maybe throw something in that's a curveball. Because from a listening point of view, that's gold, really. If you're talking about things like links, there's no hard and set rule about this. If you listen to commercial radio, for instance, you'll usually get a link off a presenter every couple of tunes. If you're listening to Radio 1, maybe every other tune there's a link. It's up to you how much of you want to put in the show, really. Something like The Essential Mix on Radio 1 is a mix. You expect that. You expect it to be 2 hours of music with some idents and a little brief recorded link by Pete Tong or whoever does it now, saying who's on. But if you come into it as a radio show and you're going to do some content with it, it's up to you how you do it. I always think every other song is a good basis to start with. Don't be frightened to put in more links if you want to, but think about where you're going to put them. I'm not a fan of a show starting and the first thing you hear is somebody talking. I always prefer to hear a music show start with music. You might want to talk at the start of that, so after it's got going a bit. My personal preference is to have the first tune and then get some talking. If you're doing a specialist music show, very important to remember, the primary reason for people to listen to it is the music. You're there to put it together and present it and do that, but they're listening. If there's a 2 hour drum and bass show on, it's the only drum and bass show that week, they want to hear drum and bass. They don't want to hear sort of you all through the show too much. So think about where you're going to put your links. You need to sell the music. Oh, by the way, as well, worst sin ever, not telling people what you've just played. Really. It is the most annoying thing from a listening point of view when somebody plays a tune and they haven't told you what it is. So, some of your links may just be about that. It may just be about that was and coming up next. But it really annoys, particularly if it's specialist music and you're a fan and you've just heard a tune and think it's fantastic and they've not told you what it is. So do remember to kind of tell people what you're playing. It is quite important. Sounds obvious, but it is quite important. Idents and sonics we've done. Communicating with passion and clarity, and this goes back to what's said about being in love with the music that you're playing. You've got to find a way to get that out. You've got to find a way to get that message out to people. in the way that you talk about it and the way that you speak it. One of the favourite sins of some bad radio shows I've heard over the years on quite big stations is when the presenter suddenly has this kind of weird transatlantic, mid-Atlantic accent, and they're kind of being a bit American, kind of, sort of, and they're from Wythenshawe, and it's a suburb of Manchester. That doesn't work. Most radio presenters will tell you, much as I'm talking to you now, that when you present a radio show, because you have no visual clue of what the presenter is doing or saying or gesticulating with their hands, you will over-modulate your voice a bit. So I would describe it as you plus 15% is how I would describe it. Or possibly you in the pub talking to your mate after a couple of beers, and it's a bit loud and you're having to get your point across and maybe overemphasize a little bit the way that you speak. Because otherwise, if it's just one note all the way through, it gets a little bit dull when you just go on one note and that's all you hear all the way through the show, and there's no link and there's no life in the voice because it just goes in a mumble. So think about how you're pitching your voice, think about modulating a bit up and down. It does feel weird when you first start to do it. There's no two ways about it. It does feel odd because it's not a fully natural way of speaking. But you want to put some life into it. Otherwise, it will just be snoozeville. On the clarity thing, by the way, while I think on, I would always advise anybody doing a radio show, pre-recorded and especially live, I would always advise you to have a little running order, which tells you what you're doing so you know where you are. And when you've got to talk, even if you're recording all your links separately, make some notes. Again, the winging it thing can work great, and I have done it many times myself on live shows where you go in. If I'm doing a live show, I have to not make too many notes, because once the mic goes on, you get a little bit of adrenaline going, and that kind of little bit of fear and buzz, for me personally, works. But I still have notes, so I know what I want to do in that link. I know what I'm going to do, and that's how you get the clarity in, by having a start and an end point. What am I going to start off with saying? I'm going to say what that tune was that I just played. I'm going to maybe talk about the producer, say what a fantastic record label he's on or she's on, and what they've got coming next, and you can see him live here. Then I'm going to say this, and that's how I'm going to finish. Don't waffle on like I'm waffling on now. A clear link doesn't have to be long. It just has to say what it's got to say in the most direct manner possible. So do try and be clear about what you're doing and think about where you're going. There's a thing in sort of daytime radio called forward motion and forward selling. And the idea is that you are always looking to what's going to come later, because you want that listener to be involved. If you ever listen to breakfast shows on commercial radio, they do it all the time. So they'll say, see this story about that woman who stole the car today? We've got her on the phone. We're going to find out why she did it after this. They do that so you'll keep listening. Because if maybe all you're interested in why that woman nicked the car is you'll listen to that bit and then tune off. And you can use that sort of like technique in your own radio show about saying what's coming later on. So if you've got music features or stuff like that, or a guest mix, or you're going to have, some kind of like classic tune, talk about it, talk about what's coming later on. And this is when, again, having your little running order, having a bit of a plan. You can write down, okay, that's where I'm going to talk about my guest in the second hour. That's where I'm going to say about where I'm playing this weekend. Just make some notes so you've got a bit of structure to it. It will help you be clear. Features, I've got it. Maybe it's personal preference. I do like a good feature in a radio show, on a music show. I like it if I've got something coming up, whether it's, some kind of classic tune, maybe it's a guest DJ who's chosen his 3 favourite disco tracks. Yeah, do you know what I mean by a feature? Sorry, I might be a bit special there. A feature is what dull radio people like me say, put into a radio show, which is not just the normal thing. So it might be, we've got a guest mix coming up later on, so you have a regular guest mix. It might be, we're going to speak to this DJ about where they're playing this weekend. It might be, we're going to talk about local club nights. That's what I mean by a feature. It's about putting something in there which is not just music and links. And things like that I always think are quite good. It gives you something to sell as well. If you've got, Avicii on the phone in the second hour, God help you, then you can say, coming up in the second hour, we're going to speak to Avicii about why he's stopped playing records. But you can have regular features. I used to do a thing where I used to play a disco track every week. I used to have a feature, God help me, on my daily show on Kiss called David Dunne's Big 12-inch, which is very embarrassing for me that is to admit, which this was back in the days of vinyl, where every day I would play the same 12-inch full mix every day. I know it was cheesy, I know, I'm sorry. There's all kind of things. We used to have one called What's in My Box, where we'd speak to a DJ about the 3 tunes we want to play that weekend. It's just stuff like that, really, just to give yourself something to look forward to and the listener something to look forward to. And, you can have some quite cool features. So think about putting a feature in your show. It might just be you're going to have a guest mix from somebody in hour 2 or later in the show. But think about that. Maybe there's something, what would you like to hear? What would you like to hear a DJ talk about that maybe they don't talk about in the show that you think is relevant? Guest mixes, just mentioned. It's up to you if you do, if you want to have guest mix. You might think, you know what, no, I'm just going to do my show every week because it's mine, and that's great. If you're doing 52 shows a year, a guest mix is really useful, especially if you've got a 2-hour slot. I have a 2-hour slot for my show. So that's 104 hours of radio I have to be ready to get out every year. The guest mix is really useful because I know every week there's an hour sorted. It can be very problematic, and I've found out over the years that, strangely enough, DJ's quite unreliable. Who knew? So, very often you'd think you were going to get a guest mix on Tuesday and it maybe wouldn't be ready. I've got round that problem for my show by having a rota. So I use a team of guest DJs. I've selected them because they all do something different. They're all quite well known in their field. So I've got a guy we were talking about before called Greg Wilson, who's a legendary DJ. I have a one called Clara da Costa, who's one of the longest serving resident DJs in Ibiza, moved out there when she was 15 and has lived and worked there ever since, has played with everybody in every club in Ibiza and continues to do so. I've got a guy called Jamie Bull who runs a night called Homo Electric, which is a great sort of gay and gay-friendly house and disco night in London and Manchester. And I've chosen these various guests because they all bring something to the show, my radio show, that I don't bring. And that's another thing that guest mixes can be quite useful for. If you want to maybe have different flavours in your show, your guest DJ might bring that. If you're lucky and you can get decent names to do it, you'll also bring audience because names are quite useful in this game. But you could easily look at having guest mixes. You can just dole them out to your friends if you want to, and it's quite nice to do that. I would say you get value out of a guest mix if it's got a purpose, if it's got a name attached to it, if it's got a reason to be there. If it's because your mate Kev just is a DJ and really wants to be on the radio show, you can do that. I'm not sure what it's going to add for you. Don't expect miracles straight away. Right? So, again, sorry to keep picking on you. You were sort of, a gentleman at the back was saying that he found it quite hard when he was first doing links. He found it quite difficult. It's highly likely, even if you are a really skilled producer and you can do all kinds of stuff, that your first few radio shows will be maybe not as great as you hoped they would be. You do get better at doing them, whether they're live or pre-recorded. The more you do them, the more you will get better. You may find, for instance, that your radio show changes, that it becomes something different as you go along. And I would suggest, actually, that for a music show, that's what it should do. If you're doing the specialist folk show, you're going to play folk music. That's what you do. If you're going to play drum and bass, you're going to play drum and bass. But you're probably not, after 3 or 4 years, going to be playing the same kind of music, no matter what the genre that you were playing in your first year. So your show will change as the music you choose changes. And don't be frightened of doing that. Again, I came out of doing the Hed Kandi show, which was, happy, 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 joy, 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 Saturday night, dancing around your handbag music, quite unashamed about it. And when I'd started my own show afterwards, it started off like that, and within a year it changed. It got much broader when I suddenly realised I could do whatever I wanted within my kind of worldview of my show. So your show will change. It will get better. The more you do it, it will get better. The more you do links, they will get better. And you'll get faster as well. So, you will be able to make these shows a bit quicker than you did at the start. I think my show took me, when I first started doing the Hed Kandi show, it used to take me forever to get to grips with it because I just couldn't get my head around how to do it properly. But you will get better and you will get faster. So don't expect miracles straight away. Music-only podcasts. Just a word about these. I've talked a load about links and stuff like that. You don't have to do links. You don't have to sort of like go banging on like I have here. You could just do a music-only podcast. In which case, you're going to need it to be something really distinctive musically. Because, you know, if you go and have a look on SoundCloud or Mixcloud, there are thousands of podcasts now. I mean, literally thousands of the things. So if you're going to do a music-only one, you really are going to have to figure out what's going to make it different from everybody else's. And I can't tell you what that is. You know, if you're a specialist in one kind of genre, then you've got to kind of figure out what do I bring to the table that's different? What's my music selection going to be that's different? Because it's tough to just get out there if there's nothing else other than essentially a one-hour mix show. If you're not going to have much talking in it, then we're going back to idents and intros and sonics again. They're going to have to do the work for you. So you really are going to need to get to grips and get some of those made or make them yourself, because that's all you're going to have. If you're not going to do any talky bits, you're going to need some decent idents and intros. So you're going to have to think about those. What I would say there is also forget everything I've just told you. Just forget it. Because somewhere in this room might be the greatest new idea for a radio show that anybody's heard in 10 years. One of you might have it. It might break every rule or idea I've just spoken to you about. And some of my favourite radio shows do exactly that. I listen to quite a bit of speech radio because of my day job and my weekend job. I hear music a lot, so I listen to a lot of speech podcasts. And you know, who would have thought that a podcast about a murder that span out for weeks and weeks and weeks would be one of the biggest podcasts ever worldwide? You know, if you want to think about broader than podcasts, who would have thought that the idea of putting a DJ in a cellar or an office or a warehouse with two cameras pointed at him or her and doing a DJ set for 2 hours would become as big as Boiler Room has become? The next greatest idea is out there somewhere, and it's not covered by what I've been talking about. So if you think you've got something that's really compelling, and you go, you know what, I can't hear this anywhere else, I don't think I'm the only person who wants to listen to it, and I don't want to do it like that bloke told me how to do it, then do it your way. Might not work, but it might do. And the best radio shows break rules. So don't be frightened to think, you know what, I'm just going to do it my way. I'm going to do it my way. Because otherwise, you're just going to have radio that is made predominantly by middle-aged white blokes. And that's not always a great idea. You've made your show. I said we would just touch on this briefly. I'm not an expert on this, so it is pretty basic stuff. You are going to have to hustle it. So if you've got a radio show, it's not enough. Even if you're on an FM station who've got promos and stuff like that going on, community station, you're still going to have to hustle your show because there's a lot of radio out there. Social media, really, really important now. Facebook is difficult. It is difficult to get your posts to cut through because they want you to pay, and if you haven't got a budget, that's kind of difficult. There are ways and means around that, but you know what? Facebook's not the only game in town. And there's no reason why you can't use Instagram or Snapchat. You know, I think, well, how do you do a radio show on Instagram? Well, put a picture up of you making the show. Put a picture up of the days. Put a picture up of your guest DJ. Put a picture up of the first record you're going to play. Think about other ways you can talk about your show on other social media. If you've got a YouTube channel, well, if you haven't, get one, set one up. If you've got a YouTube channel, just take a video of you doing the show. Post things like that up. Use any social media you can to get out there. Follow people. This is not rocket science. If you follow people, you know, you will turn up in their feed. It may well be they like what you're doing and they will, you know, make sure it goes into other people's feeds. It is important not just to wait for people to come to you. Just get yourself in people's faces as best you can. You know, get onto Mixcloud. There's a new platform called Hear This At. I don't know if you've seen Hear This At. It's essentially SoundCloud without the copyright issues, which may change, so you can put radio shows up there to download as well. Mixcloud, obviously, you can't do that. That may and probably will change for rights reasons. But get it on as many platforms as you can. Get it onto Mixcloud. Great thing about Mixcloud is, although you can't download it, they actually pay royalties to artists of the records that you use, which is a great reason to use it. You know, people whose music gets played on Mixcloud get paid for it, which I would assume you are all in favour of. Make sure if you go to iTunes that you are prepared for a bit of a wait. iTunes is, you know, the home of podcasts these days. It is a great platform because people go to it looking for stuff, and it's got massive footfall. It will take you usually minimum 2 weeks to get your podcast on there. They don't have to accept it. I think I've only ever heard of maybe 1 or 2 music podcasts being knocked back. So generally you will get on there. The great thing about iTunes is the subscribe button. You know what I mean? So, you know, when you're using social media to tell people about your show, make sure you're prompting them to subscribe, because then they'll get your show every time you do one. If you're doing an FM show, for instance, once it's gone out, go and put it on iTunes. Go and put it on Mixcloud. Put that on social media as well, so people can listen again, or if they've missed it, you can point to it. iTunes is a really useful resource, but you know, it's kind of getting harder to get noticed on there because of the sheer weight of podcasts. But I would say that subscribe button on there is really, you know, really worth looking into. Research, I've got to be honest, I can't remember why I wrote that down now. Why did I write down research? That's why I wrote it down. Once you've got your show ready, or you're preparing your show, look out there, go and look out there. Use the net to look out there and find out what's going on, where the stations are, where the places are that you can put your show, where the social media are, the footfall is that you can publicise your show. Look into what you're going to do with it. Don't just sit back, is my message for this bit. Don't sit back and think you've done a radio show and it's all going to work great, because it won't. You are going to have to work it. And hopefully it might work out for you. That's really all I have to say, because I feel like I've banged on forever anyway. Do you want to ask any questions? Anybody?
Any questions, anyone? 2 seconds. It's only fair that you're getting back, isn't it?
I don't really know how to word this, but I found starting as a DJ and then moving into podcasts and then adding vocals to it, that I had to learn an awful lot of things like compression just to get things like levels right on the finished project. And what if I was to record my voice on my microphone, which is, it's not the greatest, but it's decent, then I have a vocal that I'm quite happy with. But sometimes once I've played with all the settings to get it so within the limits of, you know, Logic or whatever, you end up with something that can sound tinny if the compression's not right, or it can sound, you know, there can't be enough bass in your voice. How have you found, also being a non-producer, if you like, how have you found that kind of learning process, and how have you overcome the kind of technical?
I would advise not to compress at all.
Right.
I would advise to use limiting, use a hard limiter. If you're, first of all, you know, if you're going to even go out through Mixcloud or SoundCloud, and you're going to come out to somebody's speakers, it's not going to sound 100%. If you're going on an FM station or a community station, they have quite chunky Optimod processors, usually at the transmitter point, to even out the signal. If you've ever listened to Capital, you will know that the compression on Capital through their compressors is mental. You know, everything's loud all the time, all the way through the record. So I would say don't compress, because you may end up being further compressed, which can make your show sound really not very nice at all. Use the hard limiter instead. It's a simpler way to do it. You're not going to be battling against a radio station or another platform's compression. Your levels will be set. I usually master mine off at minus 2 dB, so that there's some headroom then. So that if it's going out on a station which has got a lot of compression, there's still some headroom for it. It's not going to be squashed down too much. I would also say, if at all possible, make sure that you're running your show off at a 320 MP3. It's the same rule of thumb as everything else. The better it sounds when you've made it, the better it will sound whatever the platform it goes out on. Whereas if you kind of think, well, I'll just do a 192, it doesn't matter, you know, it's a smaller file. It is a smaller file, but it will sound like crap when it goes out. So, you know, make it as good as you can make it sound in your studio or your headphones. But yeah, I personally avoid compression. It's the hard limiter that I use. I'm quite anal that I edit out all the breaths in my links. So I cheat my links. But that's also because I'm old and I've got quite raspy breath. And I noticed over the last year it sounded like there was an asthmatic donkey in the studio. So I've started actually editing out the breaths in my links as well. And now I quite like the effect of that actually, because I can almost get it to overlap. And you can usually knock, you know, maybe 2 seconds off a link if you do that.
Any other questions?
It's quite nerve-wracking, this bit. I don't know what's going to happen.
I remember you saying that when you first started out, when you wanted to be in radio, that you were, you know, making endless cups of tea and like doing like the work experience backroom stuff. And I noticed you said there's probably less opportunities for that kind of work when wanting to go into like radio or the music business. What would be like the best way of going about, you know, getting your foot in the door kind of thing?
For sort of like an FM station, like that kind of, those kind of
radio,
or bigger online stage radio.
Like
I actually had it on a slide and then never mentioned it. I call it stalking with charm. So find out who the FM station, the program director or the station manager is. Those are the two people who are in charge generally. Program director will be in charge largely of content, of everything that goes out on air. Station manager will be running it and making sure it operates as a business and a facility. Those two people are the key to getting in. Some stations might have producers. There aren't very many of those anymore. You can find out if there's a producer, that would be good also. And then you need to try and make contact with them. That is quite difficult because you get a lot of emails every day. So you kind of need to work any angle that you can. If you can get to know anybody who works in the station, if you get to know somebody like I was who makes tea, and you can get in via them, that's a great angle. If you're looking for a more formal way in, there are numerous FE and HE courses in radio production now and stuff like that. They're usually allied to a station, and they are a very good way of getting in. You also come out of it with a qualification, so that if you're emailing or calling somebody blind, you know, they can see that you've done some stuff. Even if you're on your college radio station like that gentleman there was, you've done shows, things like that help. You've just got to try and use any angle that you can. It is really hard. And it's kind of, I would draw an analogy with the DJ world, which is if you can't hack being told no all the time, it's not for you. Because you are going to get told no 99% of the time. And that's kind of the environment. It is a tough, radio is a tough business. DJing, music production similarly, but you've got to be able to take the knockbacks and then think, well, I don't care, this is what I want to do. And it's almost like kind of the selection process. I have worked with people who made people jump through so many vile hoops just to see if they really, really wanted to do it, because that was the kind of people they wanted working for them. I don't agree with that approach, but it is a difficult way in. So if you can get an internship, if you can get in through an FE or an HE college course, they're great. You know, they are quite good ways in now. If there's a community station near you, they will need volunteers. They will need volunteers, guarantee it. Salford City Radio, down the road in Swinton, Gadio, All FM, all these places will need volunteers. Those people will take your calls. So if you can get in helping out at a station like that, you're then doing something in radio. So when you're then trying to get in at Capital or Heart, you can say, well, actually, I've been helping out in programming in All FM for the last year, and I've done this, and I've... So, you know, community stations, again, I know I mentioned it before, they depend on volunteers. You will get paid jack shit in radio for about 35 years. That's how it goes, unless you're a breakfast show presenter. But, yeah, it's not a career to go in for money, but if you want to get in and you don't mind paying your dues, there are ways of doing it, and I would say community or volunteer online radio stations are the way to do it, I would say.
Great. Any other questions? Yeah.
I was going to ask, with community radio stations, do they just like primarily play like just commercial music, or do they play other stuff?
They're all different, really. I mean, if you listen, Gadio's got a very sort of clear remit on the community that it serves, for instance, and within that, it's quite a broad section of music. But primarily, they are a dance music station, and very uplifting, sort of big hands in the air stuff is what they do. And they also play pop that's like that and R&B that's like that. So that's their proposition. But they're primarily dancey. They are much more upfront than even Capital in their playlists. So they'll playlist, for instance, stuff straight away off club mixes. They won't hang around for the radio edit or hang around till the impact date comes out. They'll do it now. That's their USP. Unity up the road, which, you know, has a whopping following in Manchester, certainly with like 13 to 18-year-olds. They're a bit more distinctive, a little bit more underground, I would describe them, and a bit more varied. They don't, obviously, it's not just house. Play all different kinds of music. But there are different types. My local community station in Wythenshawe, where I live, has a different music show every morning. So I think about 10 or 11 o'clock, it's a different genre. So, you know, once a week, a guy comes in and does a country show. Some community stations are really purely community focused, and it's about being a resource for people locally who want to work in radio and get exposure to radio. So they all kind of do different things, really. Broadly speaking, a lot of them are doing pop music of some kind then, yeah.
Do they allow like people locally to send music in and stuff?
Oh yeah. I mean, the thing is as well that community stations are awarded their licenses on the basis of them super serving a geographical area or a community in a geographical area. So that's part of their remit. Most of them, to sort of get their license, have said they will open their doors to the community. Unity were very, very active on this. I don't know if you know, do you know much about Unity Radio? Yeah. I mean, you know, Unity started as a pirate. John Green, who started it, wanted to take it legal, so he took it off air as an FM pirate and took it online. And one of John's special skills, he wouldn't mind saying this, is he's brilliant at finding alternative methods of funding. Because obviously commercial radio exists on adverts and sponsorship. That's how you make money. What he did was he got an old bus, did it up, stuck loads of DJ stuff in it, got a really dedicated volunteer staff together, and went to the education authorities and said, "I'm going to come to your secondary school, and we're going to teach DJ skills as part of your music course. How does that sound?" They're like, "That's brilliant, John." And so he got funding from the LEA to do that, from various different LEAs, which is what funded it while it was online, and then while they went for a community FM license. And they continue to do that, because that's community work as well. So yeah, you know, and they are open to listening to music. Unity's really good at picking up music that's made by people from Manchester, really good at doing that. And I think some of the, you know, there was a community station down in Milton Keynes that my little radio show's on that last year got a full FM license. Full, you know, it's no longer community, it's just a small scale full FM, can get radar figures, can do all the stuff that a normal sort of FM can do. So, you know, you never know what's going to happen, but yeah, they'll be much more open to listening to that kind of music than somebody in my day job where we are just playing top 40 hits essentially.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
If you've got any general questions about just radio, not necessarily how you do it, but just radio itself, how it works.
One of the questions that we've had is, how do you get your music played on national network radio?
National network radio?
Yep.
Okay. If you, how can we phrase this without me never working again if I say it the wrong way? By and large, big national groups, whether commercial or BBC, they have somebody like me, the head of music, and they'll have a bunch of people who might contribute towards the playlist, the records that are played. Most music is researched. So the BBC and all the commercial stations do music research every week or fortnightly. So once they're playing a song, they will test it with listeners to see how it's doing, and if it doesn't test well, it will be off. If it tests great, it'll get played more. That's how it works. And when it comes to selecting new music from the literally hundreds of songs that you get every week to choose from, you are looking for a story, essentially. So first of all, you're looking for something that fits what you do. So a playlist record at, say, 6 Music or Radio 2 will be very different to a playlist record at Capital, for instance. They do different styles of music. Heart, which is another global brand, for instance, will only playlist songs when they've already become a hit. It's very rare they go up front with stuff. Capital's more up front and is very dance and R&B flavoured. 6 Music's remit is to play, you know, a really broad mix of non-traditional chart music. So they will. That's how they'll process their selection through. But people like me are looking for a story. You know, if it's a new artist, what's the story? You know, are they relevant to my audience? Is the music relevant? What they're doing on Twitter, what they're doing on YouTube? Are they playing live? Have they got a following? You know, is it a good track? You know, if I play this, will it mean people will carry on listening, which is essentially what the business of radio is about, or will it make them turn off? So there's no sort of like set pattern, and the odd musical surprise does come through, but truthfully it's harder than it ever was, because as you know here, music technology has become cheaper and much more easy to use and much more available to people. It's miles easier to make a record now than it was even 10 years ago, but certainly 20 years ago. And the amount of stuff you get through from major independent labels or self-releasing artists is huge. So you're always looking for, does it fit what we're doing, and will it help me grow my audience? That's the approach we come to it. I would, if I'm being really honest, I would say if you've made a tune and it's a mainstream tune that you want to get played on daytime mainstream radio, make sure you have a really good radio plugger. I don't know if a radio plugger is a person who goes into a radio station, talks to somebody like me, and basically sells the record, tells them, you know, tries to persuade me to play it, tells me why I should play it. You know, this is why I think you should play this. It's right for you. It'll do this, this, and this. Those people can get to people like me very easy. People sort of trying to ring through on switchboards is really, really difficult. You know, so it is a harsh fact of life, but you need some promotion behind it. You really do. If you've got like a whopping following and your tune is a club tune, it's doing really well in the clubs, then the specialist show people should know about it anyway if they're worth the soul. So the DJ or the producer will know if your song is doing the business. But if you're making mainstream pop, yeah, you need some help because it's tough. It's tough.
Any other questions here? Oh, Siri's just coming on there. Any other questions? I've got something coming through from Twitter. I don't know if you'll want to answer this one. What's the worst thing that's happened to you on air?
Worst things happened to me on air?
Yeah.
I shat myself.
I was going to say keep it clean.
It's the honest truth. I shit myself on air. I was... well, you did ask. I went in to do a nighttime show and I'd had something to eat earlier on that evening which disagreed with me really violently. I threw up in the bin in the studio first, which is quite tricky when you're doing a live show. I thought I'd got away with it and was drinking water, and then the unthinkable happened. So that's the worst thing. And so I had to play the longest record I could possibly find, which was actually Stairway to Heaven, which I can tell you is ideal for changing your trousers to. Really is
A
great.
top tip there. That's
You did ask. That's the worst thing that's ever happened. The worst thing I've ever done on radio, but my lowest point on radio, would be when I was on Kiss. And, one of the things about commercial stations is they only survive through what they can generate commercially. That's why they're called commercials. So they make money through adverts or sponsorships, which is why you hear some strange things going out on air, like drug tests or have you arranged your funeral, because those things pay. And I got booked by the programme director to do a Saturday afternoon 3-hour outside broadcast from the opening of a Kentucky Fried Chicken in Hyde with a special guest, Warrior from Gladiators. 3 hours live from a piss-wet through car park in Hyde in November. To this day, it is the worst show I've ever done, and it still brings me out in a cold sweat when I think of having to fill for 3 hours in a car park with Warrior. Horrible.
Any other questions off the back of that? No? Also, it was a 2-part question, actually.
Okay,
and it was
sorry.
also, have you got any really memorable moments on your time on radio?
On radio?
Yeah. Highlights.
Flipping heck. I've been fairly lucky because, again, when you start off, you get given whatever job you're given to do. And my first job was producing, so I used to have to do features and stuff like that, speech features. And a lot of the disc jockeys didn't like doing interviews, so I used to get sent to do the interviews with artists. And then what they'd do is cut me out and put them in. Or just, they'd introduce a clip of somebody talking, saying, I spoke to Tiny Temper, and here's what he had to say about cars. And then they'd play it like that. So I had to do quite a lot of those, and I was very, I've met some absolute musical heroes over the years. And my personal favourite was interviewing Debbie Harry, because I'd been a Blondie fan since I was a kid. And getting to meet Debbie Harry is still one of the best things that I've ever done in 20 years. From a live show thing, we did, in the Hed Kandi days, we did a live beach party from a place called Cala Gracianeta, which is a really small private beach in Ibiza. Really beautiful place. And we did sort of a 3-hour Friday night live OB from there. And it was it's hard to describe really, because it didn't really translate, but like the sun was going down, really beautiful location. We had musicians there, really nice crowd. And just it's things like that really that kind of stick in your mind more than diarrhea-linked episodes, which are obviously, thank you. Yeah, but yeah, I've been lucky. I've had some good experiences through radio.
Yeah, great. Just a completely different question. Music podcasts. You're talking about long mixes and stuff on podcasts. Would someone starting out with their own podcast, would they have to buy music licensing to do that?
It's a tricky, right? If you're going to put it on Mixcloud, you're covered. So, for instance, if you put your podcast up on Mixcloud, they sort the rights issue out for you. It's fair to say that the collection agencies, I've got to be careful how I say this, I don't think the collection agencies have fully got to grips with how small-scale podcasts can operate and how those royalties can be found and paid for. Theoretically, if you're putting something up on iTunes, then you should have the rights to use it. And if you don't have the rights to use it, you should therefore be paying to use it. In real-life practice, what's happened with most people's podcasts is if you're not making money out of it yourself, they don't seem to be chasing too much. iTunes will log the mechanicals, and iTunes themselves have an agreement with the various agencies. If you have a show on an FM station, they pay all the PRS and PPL. So you're covered for that. But it is a kind of a grey area, which and I know from speaking to them, which certainly PPL and PRS have not yet got to grips, because how do you start? Where do they start to try and get rights for stuff? This is why the labels have stepped in with the likes of YouTube and SoundCloud, and they've started saying, you're the broadcaster. You are the broadcaster, so you're the equivalent of Capital Heart Global playing the music. So you, SoundCloud, should be playing, which is why it's very hard to get a show doing new music up on SoundCloud, because if they've done agreements with various labels, they haven't got agreements with all of them. You will find if you've tried to upload anything that's got, say, something from Ministry of Sound on to SoundCloud, it will get taken down really fast. But it is a kind of a grey area. It is a grey area. I think certainly somewhere along the line, somebody should be paying if that music's there, because that's the right thing to do.
Okay, sorry, so I was just reading a tweet there. That's great, thank you. I'm not quite sure, 100% sure about this tweet, so I'll read it out. So if you
Can't
can
be any worse than
decode
what I've said already.
So pirate radio versus commercial, what would you say for people starting out to get into pirate radio?
I've never worked on pirate, so I don't have an in-depth knowledge of what it's like to work on a station. I've worked with countless people who started on pirate radio, and some of the best names certainly in British music broadcasting started on pirate. When Radio 1 started, over half its on-air staff were taken from pirate radio stations. And there are some really high up people in radio, running radio networks, who started off sticking a transmitter in a council flat late at night on a Saturday. I think it does something which even the community stations can't do. it's embedded in a local area. The edge of pirate radio and the rough edges of pirate radio are what make it good. So, 99% of what I've just talked about tonight doesn't apply. And you kind of think it shouldn't either. It sounds odd when you hear a really, really slick show on some pirate stations. But I do think, because it's so expensive to start a radio station, because it's so hard, because the frequencies aren't available, and the millions of obstacles you run up against if you want to try and start a radio station, I think that's why pirate radio exists as well, because it's just really hard and it costs a lot of money to start a station and keep it going and keep it staffed. And pirate radio is kind of the fabric of certainly British radio. I worked and lived in Ireland for a while. I worked for a station called Atlantic 252, which was a national long-wave station. It was based in Ireland. I used to live in Dublin and commute out to Meath. The radio station was in an old house. And I lived right in the heart of Dublin. And on Saturday and Sunday, I used to go through the dial, just going through the pirates. And at one weekend, I counted 22 pirate stations in Dublin, going through from Friday to Saturday. Some of them literally just went Friday to Saturday. Some of them were really slick, had RDS displays, so if you tune into it on your radio, it'd tell you what you're listening to, tell you what, the name of the track. Even then, they were really sharp. Some of them were quite strange. The Irish country music pirate station that came on at weekend with one presenter was really bizarre. Pirate radio is fun. People who do it enjoy it. They do it because it's fun, because it's edgy. People who listen to pirate radio generally aren't getting what they want from commercial legal radio. But in my line of work, we can't promote pirate radio. We can't be involved with it. But I think it's part of British radio, and I can't see it going anywhere.
That's excellent. Anyone else with a question before we wrap up? I think I've got one final question, which is, if any of these guys here have obviously seen this brilliant presentation you've given this evening, they've got the fire in the belly, they just want to go straight out and start in radio, what's the very first thing that they need to do, in your opinion?
Wow, that's a killer. If you're going to go and do, if you think, right, I'm going to do a radio show, that's a really hard question. Make sure you're doing it because you want to do it. Make sure you're doing it because you really, really feel you really want to do a radio show. If it's a music show in particular, do it because there's all this music that you want to share with as many people as possible. Because that's the reason to do a specialist music show based on your music tastes. If you're going to be on an FM station in the morning or the afternoon and you're doing pop, it even helps if you really love pop music. If you've got that kind of enthusiasm to sell a Rihanna song or something like that. A lot of presenters are on there because they like being a presenter and they like doing a radio show, and that's a great reason for doing it. If you're going to do a music show, just make sure you're doing it because you just really, really want to share the music that you love with other people who are going to love it. That's the best reason.
That's a great answer.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
That's a terrible question.
Sorry about that. Sorry. I'm sure everyone got a lot out of that answer. So, if you'd like to give David a round of applause, I think it's really, really well deserved. Thank you very much, David, for taking your time out this evening. So, thank you very much for watching at home. As usual, this video will be available on our YouTube channel very, very soon. If you want to find out more about what we do at the school, please visit us at www.midischool.com. Otherwise, thanks for watching.